Closure, I'm kind of approaching this strictly from a personal perspective. You know, I certainly can talk ad nauseum about addiction and therapy and treatment and, you know, different things that you can do. And in my day-to-day role, a lot of times it's more direct advice giving from that place of expertise. But tonight it's really all about being honest and vulnerable as a person that's very much figuring out what to do on a day-to-day basis. I went ahead and whipped up a couple of slides. Forewarning, they are strictly pictures, and I just thought, you know, who doesn't, you know, want to see a little bit of picture context to go with the story? So I'll do my best to flow with those and have them align, but they're strictly something for you to look at. They do have me in them a lot too, so sorry about that. That wasn't on purpose, but I just thought it'd be cool to give you guys a little bit of visual about my family and my story as I go through it. Also just want to say that I really appreciate the initiative that you guys are making with this. I was really cool to just be connected to it in the first place. At Alpha 180, we're very closely aligned with kind of the teen to young adult college experience. And so I've thought a lot about how to work with universities and how to just increase the reach that, you know, universities have to make a difference in the world. And addiction is certainly a place for opportunity on a lot of college campuses where we can do a little bit better. So I think it's cool that you guys have made this effort to connect with UT and get this message out to the community. And I hope to see it grow and be a part of it. So thanks for asking me to come. So the title of the talk is Parent Professional Person, Navigating Our Ever-Evolving Self-Identity and Recovery. And like I said, this is all kind of from the perspective of my story and over time, how I've related to my recovery and the way that I've kind of defined it and the work that it's involved. It's an always changing process, right? And so I wasn't sure who would be in the room or kind of where you are in this process. So you may be a lot further along than me. You may feel really kind of clear on what your recovery program is. Or you might not have even thought about that, or you're just kind of scratching the surface on what that might mean. So I'm going to try to define that briefly, a little bit about what is personal recovery, what is self-identity. I'm going to share my story, hopefully succinctly, and how that's kind of changed for me over time, over the years. And then just share some extremely practical tools that I use on a daily basis in my own recovery process. And then, of course, I'm more than open to answer questions that are maybe a little bit more specific to something that might be going on in your own life. But yeah, so firstly, like, you know, what even is recovery? And I think that there are places where it's defined, you know, pretty specifically, like in a 12-step program, it can be measured in, you know, certain ways, working the steps, having a sponsor. But for me, over the years, what it's really been is just a commitment to the values and the practices that take me closer to who I'm supposed to be. You know, I think that life throws stuff at us, and we get dented and bruised and have challenges. And when those things happen, recovery are the tools and the foundation that keep me aligned with who it is I am. And especially with, you know, loving somebody that's struggling with addiction, just like they and their addiction can get pulled further and further away from who it is that they might be at their core. You know, on my side of the street, the way that I respond to that over time, I can slowly get pulled further and further away from the person that I am and starting acting in a way that I don't even recognize. So my definition of my own personal recovery is my commitment to being that person and staying on that path, and then some specific practices that keep me aligned with that. And then identity, there's a lot of different ways you could talk about self-identity, but ultimately, self-identity is how I experience myself inside my own head, right? So it's, in essence, kind of the whole constellation of memories, of experiences, of values, and how I experience the world through that lens. And there's been periods in my life where my self-identity has been, I'm a great student, or I'm, really kicking butt at my job. I'm really awesome at this job that I have. And then there's been times where my self-identity really leaned towards like, man, I'm really failing as a parent right now, or I'm really sucking at my job right now. Like the exact same identity evolves over time, and it can start leaning negative, it can lean positive. So again, kind of the core theme there is staying close to these parts of ourselves over time. So yeah, I suppose we can go to the first slide here. I got to make sure I know what I'm talking about. So I was born to parents that I'm not really sure ever really liked each other that much, unfortunately. They, exposed me to a lot of just kind of crisis and difficulty, and got divorced at a really early age. And I can remember from as early as I can remember having this thought inside my head that like, if I were able to fix my family, like that would kind of make everything right in the world. Like I don't know what other kids think about, but when I grew up, I wanted to have a family. I wanted to have this kind of safe, comfortable home to go to with two parents in it, and those parents stayed together and they loved each other and they took care of their kids. Because I thought, I'm unhappy in the world, I'm struggling. And the reason why that is because I have this chaos. I'm bouncing back and forth from house to house. I never know what I can count on for how people are going to respond to me. And specifically, my mom was the kind of person that, really needed to be taken care of a lot. And so from an early age, because it was the two of us, she would share a lot with me. And I felt a tremendous amount of responsibility to care for her feelings. And I can remember her, crying, and I'm maybe sitting at the end of her bed, and I'm just a little boy trying to figure out like, what am I supposed to do here? How am I supposed to make the situation better? And when I was able to do that and do the right thing, and she felt better and calmed down, that made me feel good inside. So I ventured out into the world thinking I'm going to have a family, and that's what I'm going to do right. I'm going to do it better. And so at the age of 17, I found myself a father. My son was born to a 15-year-old mom and then myself as a teenager. And at this time in my life, I've already begun struggling with my own substance use, and having some of the weight of that childhood was kind of coming out as depression and anxiety, and I was self-medicating that with these drugs. And so I was already in this really low point, and I have that one picture of myself. It's really the only one I have, just with just nothing going on in my eyes, as you can kind of see, just lost. And as a boy, basically, my son was born, and I can remember desperately wanting to stop using before he was born. I can remember desperately wanting to have a home that was put together. I had dropped out of school so that I could work. I was trying to get an apartment. This is in Raleigh, North Carolina, where I'm from. And so I had really good intentions, but a lot of mess still to deal with. And speaking of back to the identity part, so when my son was born, I can remember looking at him and just kind of other people have all types of different feelings when they first see their kid, I'm sure. But for me, I had this internal sense of, I know that I know how to love this kid. I know that I'm going to be there for him. I know that I'm going to be able to do this. I had no idea what that was going to mean. But it was one of the first core pieces of my identity that I felt proud of. Like it was this, I know I can do this feeling. Going on a little bit further, my own addiction kind of took root after that. If you can imagine being that early of an age, trying to take care of a kid. So we had, I had my job at Five Guys flipping burgers. I had my apartment with this girl that I had this kid with, and I was determined that we were going to beat every single odd and that we were going to overcome all these naysayers, and that, I was going to prove all these things that all these adults around me couldn't figure out how to do. I had these adults that are telling me I'm not ready, and that this is a mess. And I'm like, well, what kind of example have you guys been throughout my life? I'm going to prove that I know how to do this. I've been studying you guys for 17 and a half years. I think I've got this thing down. I'm ready to go. And I was confident that if I worked hard enough, if I loved hard enough, that we could make this happy family work. So when he was just a baby, I was lucky enough to get to go to treatment and entered a treatment program. It's been over 15 years ago now, and had that resolution in my heart that I was talking about being a good dad. I got out of that treatment center. I took the suggestion that they gave to stay in a sober living program, which meant that I moved to this new city to kind of start over. And again, I've got this kind of picturesque idea in my head of, okay, I've got some things working against me, but I'm going to figure out how to make this happen. So at this time, I'm a high school dropout, barely turning 20, back working full time, doing what I'm being asked to do, working my recovery program. And in essence, the plan is for my son's mother to do the same on her end of the street, right? So she's going to work her recovery program. I'm going to work mine. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. And about 60 days into that recovery process, I was lucky enough that my family kept my son, who's really young at the time, just so that I could focus on my recovery. And things are good. My heart's full. And I get this call that my son's mother has left her sober living program, has relapsed somewhere in Nashville, Tennessee, where we were living, and that no one knew where to find her. And I can distinctly recall holding this phone, getting this message, or being told this by the person I was talking to, and just being hit with the next decade and what it might mean for me that I was going to potentially become a single dad, and that this fantasy that I had been working so hard towards wasn't necessarily going to work out the way that I had planned. And so it solidified to me that my recovery is going to have to come first no matter what, because if my son's mother is not going to work her program, this kid's going to need someone in his life, right? So what's really helpful about early recovery, and I mean this positively, is it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, go to meetings, talk to your sponsor, don't use, be of service, and that really worked for me to have this blueprint of how to be a good person. I really like to get a pat on the back. I really like to get an A in the class. I really like to know what to do next. And so I was pretty good at early recovery. And quite like a lot of this in a really positive way, I added this new aspect of my identity, which was, recovery poster boy in an essence, and leaned into that for the next few years. Ended up getting into college through a collegiate recovery program. I won't go on a tangent about that, but there's some, including UT, some really cool recovery support services on college campuses, and one in particular by getting a GED and then applying to this program, I was able to get into college. I can remember starting college and meeting with my advisor, being told about classes, signing up for my first couple of classes, and I was kind of like, how does this college thing work? I've never studied for a test. I finished ninth grade and was politely asked to not return to the school that I was at, and I did that for them. Never came back. And so when I walked into my first college class, I really had no idea what I was going to do. And they said, just sit in the class, show up early, stay late, ask for help, be humble. I was like, all right, well, what about tests? Like, I've never studied, I've never done anything. They're like, well, just take those notes, get some flashcards, turn them into flashcards, study those flashcards, and you'll be ready for the test. And I'm like, all right, that sounds easy enough. What is a flashcard? And so I started at a absolute ground zero with how to be a student. But I found out that I hadn't fried all my brain cells like I thought I had. I wasn't bad at school like I had told myself, like the story that I had extracted from those teachers all over, all the struggles I'd had. I started actually doing well. And I added another aspect of my identity, which was, capable student or like capable person. And built this healthy confidence about, facing new things, and that statistic overcomer thing that I like to try to be. Here I was walking on a true college campus as a ninth grade dropout, as a former probation member, as a teen parent. I was now a college student, and so this idea that anything can happen in recovery if you put yourself in the right position, if you practice these simple practices, took an even deeper seed in like who I wanted to be. What can sometimes happen with positive reinforcement when you have kind of an addict mind? I don't like to think of like I have this messed up mind, but for simplicity, like we'll just say I have an addict mind that likes to take things and twist it up. So I start getting this positive feedback about how I'm showing up as a student, and so I take that to mean like you have to get an A in every single class or you suck. And so that's what I did. I got an A in every single class in college, graduated in 3 years as valedictorian, and probably had like maybe one friend that like even knew me, like I was just so laser focused on work and doing what I needed to do that even like, yes, it was positive that I did that, but I kind of missed the point along the way. Oh, you got it. Or you can go back one. About a year and a half into my recovery, I got my son back. My mom was nice enough to be able to help out during that time, which was really, really hard for me to be away from him, but also a blessing. And, maybe like going off to college is not the analogy that works for you at whatever phase of life that you're in. However, there are times where we have to choose ourselves first in order to be better off for someone we love. And in this instance, it was, I'm going to choose to be away from him so that I can get this opportunity to go off to college. I could have gotten him back right away. I could have rushed into that. But I took a step back so that I could give him a better future. And it was really, really hard. But I did that period of time, started off college, and then got him back. And then had him all through grad school and the beginnings of my career. And so that little boy grew up sitting in classes. He's probably been to 1,000 recovery meetings. um, and being shuffled around as I juggled working full time, going to school full time, and trying to be the best dad I could be as a 21-year-old, 22-year-old, whatever I was at the time. And he's awesome. He was my inspiration through that difficult time. So I got really inspired to want to try to give other people the opportunity that I had been given. And a lot of times in, a lot of times in treatment or in the beginning stages of recovery, especially with young people, they encourage you to kind of take it really slow and kind of keep your life small and simple. And I totally agree with that. Like there's a necessary period where you got to take a step back, put some goals on hold, and focus on yourself. But there is also a time when you have to jump back into life and give yourself a shot and kind of take a risk. And often, we're the last people that think that we're capable of doing whatever that thing is. So when I was starting my recovery, like there really wasn't anybody, saying like, have you thought about college, or like, what do you want to do with the rest of your life? There was a lot of talk about going to meetings and, doing what I was supposed to do. But no one really asked me about, trying to like advance my career or get back on track with, big goals in life. And, I came from a family that really prioritized education and told me I could do that. And, I was privileged enough to know like I could choose that path if I wanted to, but I just got so far away from it and kind of rejected it. And so when I was starting my career, I really wanted it to be about showing people that recovery doesn't have to be something that closes doors. It should be something that opens doors for you. And I mentioned this earlier, Trinae, like one of my favorite kind of little idioms or whatever about recovery is, addiction is one of the only diseases, or maybe the only disease that you can get that when treated will leave you better off than if you'd never had that disease at all, right? So it can be this horrible, terrible thing, but then once we start dealing with it, we can become an even better version of ourselves than we thought that we could be all along. So I wanted to work with young people, helping them have an experience like mine, where they could come to a place, focus on their recovery, focus on their mental health, get healthier, but then also be guided in setting big goals and getting back to the things that addiction might have gotten in the way of. And so did that in a few various ways, but ultimately got connected to someone and partnered with them and founded a program here in Austin, Alpha 180, that y'all heard earlier, that's really all geared towards helping young people find community, get inspired, and then be able to jump into life and accomplish the goals that they might not even realize were possible in the first place. So it's very focused on getting people back in college, having that real like young person experience of getting into trouble, having fun, just living life basically, and being able to do that in a context that still supports their recovery and has the structure that you need at that time. There you go. So again, during this time, the identity that I was developing was really about achievement and getting confident and becoming an adult and growing up. And so I became, a boss, became a leader in a professional sense in a new way, got pushed into all these different challenges of program development and managing finances, figuring out a brand, like dealing with upset parents, dealing with difficult clients, all those things. And I felt good about it. I felt I felt positive about who I was growing into as a person. And so I had this checklist in the back of my mind of like, I'm slowly making my way down the list of all the things that people say that you need to do and be to be great. So next thing on that list is find a wife, build your family, get back to creating that family that that I said I've been always trying to create. So I got married and pretty quickly had 2 more kids. We can go to the next one. um, so so before I knew it, I had been the single dad to 1 kid for 7-8 years straight, and then over about a year and a half period, got married, and then I guess maybe 2 years, and then had 2 more kids, and um, that that side of me that's trying to do everything perfectly started rearing its head a lot. And again, I'm kind of have to put myself in y'all's shoes as far as, you know, how you relate to this in the context of your own life. But I think we can all kind of identify with trying to show up perfectly as more and more things get thrown at us. And when we feel good at something, we especially will lean into that. And if as I'm assuming some of us do with that codependent kind of struggle with boundaries, struggle with saying no, I tend to attract, I'm certainly not challenging, but just big personalitied people, I guess. Like, I've been surrounded by a lot of characters and, the work that I've chosen. Like, I just like chaos, apparently. And I would never say that about myself. If anyone that knows me, like, I'm like the calmest, most introverted person ever. But for whatever reason, I keep putting myself around like big personalities in difficult situations and trying to solve them all the time. So before I knew it, I had gotten myself pretty overwhelmed with having a teenager and toddlers and a growing business and letting my own recovery kind of fall to the side as I try to juggle all of that stuff. With my teenage son, it wouldn't be untrue to say that the first 10 years of my recovery were really about saving him, like that. As much as it was about me and it was about my life, like the linchpin of it all was I need to keep this together for this little boy and how connected we were. And so about 2.5 years ago, when I found out that he had started using substances, it was a pretty major blow, as you can imagine. I had reflected a lot over the years about, what am I going to do if I have to cross that bridge? And it was pretty much like, well, we're just going to do everything to avoid that and never have to cross that bridge. Like, if I have my own recovery, I know everything about recovery, I know everything about teenagers, obviously these are all false statements, because how could you know everything about teenagers? But I just thought if I have enough information and I'm a healthy enough example, that we won't have to deal with that. And so he started using substances, and I didn't know the nature of what he was doing necessarily. I just saw that he was changing, and he was starting to lie about everything. He was starting to, steal things in little ways, transferring money, not being where he said he was going to be, things like that. And there was a particular night where I can't really remember what had happened that night, but I just decided, like, we need to have a conversation about where this is going. We're just a few months into this process. And I basically said, this is a fork in the road for you, and we can go down this path where we get this under control and we get back on track and get healthy again. And that doesn't mean we won't experiment at some point in your life or whatever, but like we're not going to do it like this. Or we're going to go down this other path where you continue to make the choices that you're making, and I'm going to intervene on that. I'm going to send your butt to treatment. I'm going to, show up in every way I have to make sure that you're not self-destructive. And ultimately, he chose that second path. He chose to keep going the exact same direction he was going. And that was a really difficult thing to watch. I started reaching out for a lot of help from the people around me. I'm obviously know a lot of people in this field. And, I got a lot of love, but I got a lot of bad advice too, I feel like, while there are some tried and true things, like what's hard about this is, everybody's got an opinion of what you can do, and everybody's got something to tell you. And so it was really important for me to, kind of have my own groundedness as best as I could so that I could run this advice through my own, head and heart and make clear decisions. And it was terrifying and confusing and uncertain. And what I think is one of the most difficult things about this process, as some of you know, is it doesn't necessarily, there is no necessarily like perfect right thing to do. It is ambiguous and unclear sometimes. And so to have to let go in that way, with this little boy who, like I said, I had basically committed my life to helping avoid exactly what we were having to walk through. It's pretty hard. He ended up going to stay with my mom as just like a summer trip. It was kind of like the last chance that he was going to have before having to go to treatment. And it's like, if this goes wrong, that's what's going to happen. And we were watching his phone, and he had made some moves to go find some substances up in a state that he'd barely ever been in from, strangers he didn't know. And so I hopped on a plane, flew out there, and did a surprise intervention at a coffee shop with my 17-year-old son and flew him to treatment. And I think that was, after dropping him off, the moment where I kind of had my own fork in the road. And for me, it was continuing to externalize my spiritual condition. And what I mean by that is I'm allowing all the things on the outside to dictate how I feel inside. Or I can go the other route, which is I'm going to work my own recovery program from this new perspective and learn how to be a healthy person, even as I go through something that would have been on my, top 3 biggest fears of all time list. And so that's what I chose to do. And while he was in treatment, started going to Al-Anon meetings, jumping into my own therapy again. Something that's been really helpful for me has been doing some therapeutic retreats every couple of years. There's places you can go for just, a few days or a week or so just to kind of do your own work. And for a person like me who's, life is absolutely not going to stop for me to, do my work like day to day. Going off and going somewhere myself was really, really, really helpful. And that's continued to this day. So he has embraced his recovery, and in those 2 years, it's now evolved. Like He's not completely sober necessarily. I feel like I have a pretty good grasp on, for the most part, how things are doing with him, but it's been a very much evolving process. So there was that time where it was black and white, gung ho, like I'm working my Al Anon program, you're working your AA program. Went to meetings together, we did therapy as a family. I went and attended, all the stuff at that treatment center. And then, a year goes by and it shifts a little, and he's young, he's young and um, still needs to make some mistakes and experience some stuff. So then we had to wade into the waters of letting him see old friends or, have privileges back. And so on a day-to-day basis, we're still we're navigating those things. And that's the most important thing I can say is like, it's extremely messy along the way. And that's why I started off with having this guidepost of what is your self-identity? What is your definition of your personal recovery? Are these things that you're even thinking about on a daily basis? Because I have approached life in such a way that I'm going to arrive somewhere and it's going to be fine. Like give me the playbook, I'll do it. So when my son was in treatment, my job was attend my Al-Anon meetings, read the reading they sent, show up to the family program, write the best parent letter possible, like we're the only parents that came to like every weekend you were allowed to. So we're like the best parents. And like I could measure myself off of that. But what the real recovery has looked like recently is more like, am I in control of my paranoia when he tells me, I'm going to see this particular person that I'm not so sure about? Or am I, grounded when I try to have a conversation with him about something that I know is difficult for both of us? Am I going to approach that conversation with serenity and with some open-mindedness? Or am I approaching it with a desire to control what he does and decide for him what he's going to do? And man, is that challenging? Whether it's an adult or a kid, the idea of just letting them go and finding that line of like, okay, this is my part. This is what's an appropriate amount for me to put myself in this situation. And then here's just where I have to let go and let him figure it out. And so, even as I say, like, he's not entirely sober, it's like the fear of judgment or the fear of the future or what's going to happen. Like, I don't know. But I know that as our family navigated it, it became like, hey, you don't have to go to AA meetings every day anymore or what. Like we had to cross those bridges. And that's when the real recovery starts. So just to kind of wrap it up a little bit, today was Monday, right? So today is Monday. And, Mondays can be a kind of a triggering moment for our families. If you can imagine getting little kids off to school and starting a week and all that stuff. And so I spent, the whole weekend doing chores. I spent the middle of the night getting screamed at by a little 5-year-old that needed some help going back to sleep. And then my alarm goes off, 45 minutes, an hour before everyone else gets up. And I put tremendous energy into getting my mind right before my day started. I open the blinds, look out at the sun, take a few breaths, tell myself some affirmations out loud in the mirror. As cheesy as it is, it's scientifically backed, so I'll go with that. And read a couple of readings, sat in a chair, did some meditation, and then the chaos ensued, right? Then the day starts. And that's what recovery looks like today. And Somewhere in the middle of the day, I went for a run. On that run, listened to a little meditation podcast, um, and then came here, got here a little bit early, did a little bit more breathing. And so I just share that because that's my experience of what working this program has looked like in practice. You know, like there's these formal ways, going to meetings, being here, doing what you're doing right now. But the real way that it manifests for me is whether I'm taking the time to reconnect to those values, to that person that I am in my head. Because if I don't do that work, like I'm so much more likely to lash out at someone, to, just be frazzled for something that I have to do. And then I feel like I dropped the ball. And so I start feeling bad about myself, and then it just spirals into the rest of my day. So making sure that I stay connected to who I am. And specifically, since I said that I would leave you guys with a couple of specific things I do on a daily basis, and they're very basic, but morning and nighttime rituals. So how I end my day, how I start my day, like I said, um, some form of spirituality. And spirituality can mean anything to different people, but for me, it's about being present and mindful and connected so that I can be open to listening to something that's coming. And that alone is something you can go your months not doing if you're not intentional about it. I can pray and still not be mindful, right? Like I can take those actions, but if I'm not actually present, I'll miss it. Physical exercise. Anyone that's my friend will hear me talking about running. We can go to the last slide if we're not there already. Um, so, so exercise is just something I think a lot of people maybe don't mention enough recovery-wise. Like there's a million benefits to your mental health, to your nervous system, and specifically why I threw those pictures up, just to be silly kind of, but running is my thing. It's my one thing in the midst of this chaotic life that's just for me. So having some kind of practice like that that's just yours. Therapy. I do individual therapy. I've come in and out of that over the years. Like, sometimes it's a waste of time. Sometimes you're just rehashing your week and it's useless. Sometimes it's extremely helpful. So at least being open to it. And couples therapy, I'll give a nod to that. I think when you have a family member that's struggling with addiction, it's often going to cause problems in your relationship. And my marriage was no different. Um, and even that, like, there's just a lot of love and fear. It's not that we're not on the same page. It's just like you're likely to take those fears out on your partner. They're that safe person. And so couples therapy has been really helpful. I mentioned the therapeutic intensives. Those have been really helpful if that's something that someone can do. So silly, but so powerful in my life is daily reader books. Every single morning, I've done a daily reading. I mean, I've missed some days, but basically 15 years straight, changed books, done all kinds of different approaches to it, but super helpful. Books and podcasts. I think one of the benefits of the technological age that we're living in is the access to information that we have. And so there are some really, really, really solid podcasts out there. And something about, I've spoken from the teen parent perspective, but man, something about just hearing someone else describe what you're going through and normalize it. And it just takes so much of the energy out of it. And it's approachable. And then this is probably the one that I do the least good at, which is having a sense of community. Addiction is very isolating. And I think the family members might feel that the most even, like in addiction, I did have buddies. I did have people that I was using with. It was being a parent of someone struggling with addiction that felt really isolating. And I was honestly shocked about how uncomfortable treatment professionals were to talk to me about it. Like everybody I know, well, not everybody, but most people directly like knew that situation was going on. They cared very much about my son and about me, but they were uncomfortable asking apparently because they didn't, not very often. And so having people in your life that, really understand that you can be vulnerable with. And hopefully I've been vulnerable enough to paint a little bit of a picture, but, there's been, holes that needed to be fixed in the walls from fights. There's been, like driving around trying to find people. There's been screaming matches. Like it's ugly, and you don't want to tell people about that. You don't want to expose that. Like I was saying earlier, like as my son's recovery has evolved, like judging that and what people think about that, like every aspect of it, I think triggers shame. So having a group of people that you can be completely honest and open with, absolutely crucial as well. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap it up there. I appreciate getting this opportunity. I hope that kind of a personal story was an appropriate way to share my message with you guys. But more than anything, I just want to give a little bit of hope that recovery absolutely works. Like this process, these tools, this lifestyle is the difference between whether I go through my days mostly thinking about what can go wrong, mostly thinking about what I've done wrong, mostly thinking about, all these things that are outside of my control versus going through my day excited about the next thing that's coming, confident in who I am, and at the end of the day, connected to people like you that are awesome and give my life meaning. So, thanks.
Nico, it is an honor and privilege to be here and hear you share your story. And you said being vulnerable in this space. And I got to say, I sit here with no words as you're sharing because of the sacredness of what you're expressing, your life story and what you're putting out there, and what is a continuing story as you're going along. And I know that in the crowd, there are questions, and I'm going to be selfish and be the first one to throw a few questions because you spoke of identity, and you spoke of multiple identities of being a son, of being a father, of being a professional who's caring for your son with many of the things that echo from your life. And one of the things that crossed my mind, and I'm sure a lot of parents think about this, is that identity that we have, that you said the word fantasy, the fantasy that things are going to be perfect, and the isolation you feel when you're the one parent that is not perfect, and you look at everyone else. And so to the parent out there that's in the crowd or watching online that says, I see everyone around me at school or in my community, and everything seems fine, but I'm ashamed and I don't know what to say. What do you say to that parent who is not sure whether they even want to admit that there are things that aren't going perfectly?
Well, there's a bit of a cliche answer that I think has value, but before I say that, I'll say that I do think that it's important to find that community that understands you because, addiction sadly does carry stigma. And I think that we're so vulnerable and broken, especially when we're in that lonely place or starting this process, that, having the right kind of support is important. And so making the effort to seek out people that really do understand and won't give you advice or, if this, you could do this, or this is what I heard, but that can truly just listen and be supportive. It's been really important. So I've made an effort to cultivate some relationships with people that give me that kind of energy, that accepting, loving, supportive energy. And then the more kind of cliche answer, which is something, again, that I'm constantly working on, is not comparing. Like, we don't know other people's stories. We don't know what they're dealing with. And so I can fall into that trap sometimes, for sure. But at the end of the day, I'm trying to define how I think about myself as whether I'm showing up. Like, this is my situation. I'm showing up for it as the best parent I can. I'll measure myself that way today, rather than comparing myself to what I think someone else is doing.
We're going to have a microphone going around here. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. But I'm going to sneak in one more selfishly. I'm so sorry. But you talked about being the executive director of Alpha 180, a program on campus with UT, working with young people. And my mind goes to a lot of parents who have to say goodbye to their kids, whether it's college, whether it's kiddo living somewhere else, and they're not there 24/7. And then they get the tough news that kiddo is struggling and there's serious struggles. So for the parent out there that feels like you mentioned it, paranoid that this interaction is going to go this way, or worried that maybe it's going a different way, but they don't see their kids day to day. What do you say to them? Like, what can they do to maintain that peace and serenity when they can't control their child that may be far away?
Well, I think a lot of self grace in this process is vital. I mean, just, to be concerned about your loved one, especially if they've been known to struggle or are struggling, is an extremely normal biological response that makes a lot of sense. It's what we do with that we need to be careful with. So if that is prompting us to be really paranoid and check their location every 5 minutes and, text them over and over and try to control their life, then I'm kind of feeding that paranoia. But if I'm acknowledging, like, I'm concerned, and, here's the evidence of why I'm concerned, and getting the support I need for that. And that's the hard part with this thing, is, like, sometimes it is necessary to take action. But if I have my program, whatever that looks like for me, I can approach it from kind of a grounded, more level place. And, like I said, I'm dealing with this with my son on a day-to-day basis. If he asks to go out or whatever, it's like that desire to control comes in, and there's times to step in and times to not. So my first self-check is, am I trying to control the outcome? Am I paranoid in my decision-making? Okay, no, I'm just trying to be a good parent from a healthy place. That's like my self-check before I take action.
Thank you. Microphone is going around. If you have a question, please feel free to jump in.
Yeah, we had a question that got submitted. Could you talk a little bit more about how the relationship, because there's multiple parent-child relationships that you talked about, that may have changed, both maybe in the challenging and maybe some in the more growth and connecting places between you and your parents through your recovery journey, and for you and your son in his own recovery journey?
Sure. So I think, I guess I'll talk about my parents first. So I just got coffee with my dad right before I came here. He's been in Austin visiting for the last couple of weeks, doesn't live in town. And so that has been a much slower, longer process. I think, again, like, a lot of recovery is like, what's my side of the street and what's their side of the street. And I'm now, 35, should be relatively grown up adult. But there's definitely a teenager or some version of myself that's still in there, that's really pissed off at my dad and really not okay with some of the things he's done, continues to do. And so I have to kind of check in constantly with being okay with him, I guess. And so it's like, at this stage of our relationship, I've kind of identified, like, these are the ways that I can engage with you that work for me. I want you to come spend time with my kids. I'd love to go out to coffee with you. Let's have a conversation. But let's, like, maybe not talk about some of these things where I'm still raw. And that's for his benefit as well as mine. And so with my parents, the way that it's evolved is observing them just as people, recognizing that they're flawed and they, have made various choices in their life and are where they are. And then also looking to all the positive things they do. Like in this example, my dad made this huge effort to come see his grandkids. Let me acknowledge that and appreciate that. So all that to say that healthy boundaries with my parents goes a long way. And then with my son, so right now, it's tough right now. Like, he's deeply in the stage of life where he, like, doesn't want that much to do with me and is trying to differentiate. And man, it is really funny when you were, like, a very, like, acting out, like, wild. I had big ear holes. I've got, tattoos. I was that teenager, and now my son is, like, dresses like crazy. And man, like, I'm fighting that desire to be like, why are you wearing that? Or what are you trying to make? What statement are you making with that? So I'm trying to just, like, accept him exactly for where he is, and make an effort to, it seems silly, but, like, I think about, like, what am I going to talk to him about today? What are we going to connect on today? Because it's so easy for our relationship to become, like, check-ins and corrective, like, what'd you do, who was there, what, that type of thing, and just kind of miss the connection. So the work in my parent relationship right now with my son is like, okay, we've got this stuff over here that we're aware of, like, substance misuse, sketchy friends, like, what are you gonna do for college? Like, did you clean your room? Like, there's all of that we could talk about, and that's fine. We gotta talk about that sometimes. But then there's, like, who are you and what are you thinking about, and what's going on in your life, and how can we connect today? And at least at this particular stage, like, I actually have to put a lot of effort and thought into just trying to put myself in his shoes and find some things to connect on. So hopefully that answers.
And we've got time for questions. If someone has a question in the crowd, please feel free to raise your hand and we will pass the mic around. Got just a few minutes here. All right. Because if not, I'm going to steal one more question here. I love, Nico, that you talked about practical advice for parents and how you take care. Because that was one thing I was thinking of is what's a self-care routine? And then you started talking about morning and evening rituals. And I took notes and I saw everything from taking care of spirit, taking care of your physical wellness, taking care of your emotional health through therapy, taking care of your mind by just stimulating new thoughts, reading, podcasts, and then the social aspect, which is the community. And so all of these are daily practices that you're encouraging us to do. So for the parent out there or the caregiver or family member that says, but my time is so consumed with, you've seen this work or all the chaos that we're a part of. How do you work this into your day and be an effective parent and do all those things?
No, I appreciate the question, and that's what I've kind of wanted to present what I had to say. So just kind of personally is like, this is how it looks in life, right? Like it's messy and challenging and difficult, and there's no like green grass recovery place and ugly, dark addiction place. I mean, to an extent, but for me, it's there's things being thrown at me all the time, and these practices become kind of the foundation of how I deal with those things that get thrown at me. And I am in a stage of life. Y'all have heard my story now. I've had some busy stages of my life, been a busy guy. This might be about the most hectic with toddlers, a teenager, a challenging business, all of that stuff. So I think the first thing is a commitment, and my wife and I need to share that commitment. Like if you're in a partnership, hopefully both people can respect the other's need for personal time or whatever those things are. And then it's a lot of self-discipline. So we don't like to throw out that principle as often. We love vulnerability, humility, grace, like those are all great. Self-discipline is a lot of what it takes to show up well in life, in my opinion. So today, it was the discipline to wake up extra early so that I had the time for those things. Other days it might be choosing to sleep in because I need that or whatever. But I have to be intentional about that. And then that's why I threw out like such practical, seemingly obvious things is a lot of people don't do quite basic, simple, obvious things that go a long way. Because you certainly have time to throw on a podcast when you're driving. Sure, maybe you can only make one meeting a week or whatever the case is, but you can, do an online meeting almost any time of the day. You can turn on a podcast anytime you're driving. Anybody has 5 minutes to do a reading before their day starts. So I think for the most part, we can all find that time. And I also would say that like I have, a vision of, again, you've heard this a few times, like this vision of this person I'm trying to be. I'm going to hold it loosely, but the person I'm trying to be, does a little meditation every day and, gets outside and moves his body a little bit. And like, these are things that I want to do. So the first thing is like, okay, I'm going to commit to this healthy version of myself, this healthy identity, like healthy Nico does these things. Therefore, I'm going to do these things to the best of my ability. And as the years go by, at different stages of my recovery, this would have been a completely different talk. At this stage of my recovery, I'm kind of realizing like it's always about those basic practices. It's just, you just keep coming back to them over and over. So, yeah.
Well, Nico, I'm going to say thank you for, again, the advice that you have shared, the practical steps that we can take on, and your story. That, above all, is just something that, when you talked about vulnerability, connects with many of us here. This program is a new program, and we are building towards building that community that you were talking about, a space for parents to be as vulnerable as you have been. And so we are working towards that goal for caregivers, for relatives. Again, our key phrases are community, education, and support. And so to that, for those of you who are online and for those of you here in person, the community building piece is, again, what we are experiencing together as a group. And the education piece is coming from speakers like Nico. And we encourage you to share this, to provide support to others. So if you're in the crowd here and you know people that are in the area, invite them. This is every Monday night at 6:30 that we kick off, 7 o'clock that we start. And for those online, please feel free to subscribe to our social media accounts and go out there and just share what you're hearing here, because this is something that we want to grow into the community. So thank you so much for attending, and we'll stick around here for a little bit for those of us here in person. And if you have questions or anything, please online, feel free to reach out to us. Our website is texastx-cares.org, and feel free to explore more videos, and we'll be together next week as well to continue the series. And as we say every week, if you're new to this space, welcome home. All right, thank you.